My name is Olivia. I am 33 years old, and I am the founder of a highly successful cybersecurity consulting firm. I bought a luxury Mediterranean cruise for my entire family to celebrate my sister having a baby. But as I stood at the airport departure gate with my luggage, my mother sent a text message saying I was uninvited because my father only wanted real family on the trip. They actually gave my $40,000 ticket to my brother-in-law's mother instead. What my parents did not realize was that the very credit card they were currently using to buy luxury watches in the duty-free terminal was controlled entirely by me, and I was about to hit them with a financial reality check they would never forget. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my family's parasitic little world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to use your resources to teach your toxic relatives a permanent lesson about boundaries. Trust me, the payoff to this story is something you will definitely want to hear. The chaotic noise of the Miami International Airport first-class lounge faded into absolute silence as I stared at the bright screen of my phone. I was standing by the espresso machine, my designer suitcase resting against my leg, holding a boarding pass for a flight to Rome that I had paid for entirely out of my own pocket. I had funded this entire TUI vacation complete with private balcony suites and exclusive shore excursions just to celebrate my younger sister Madison and her upcoming baby, by society standards. I am a self-made multimillionaire, by my family standards. I have always been nothing more than the invisible bank ATM. Growing up, I was the quiet kid who spent her weekends coding in the basement while Madison was paraded around as the golden child of the house. Madison, who is now 30 years old, calls herself a lifestyle influencer. In reality, she has been unemployed for 5 years, living entirely off the allowance I foolishly provided to my parents, which they quietly funneled directly to her to fund her aesthetic. 2 years ago, she married Jamal. He is an African Amin man with a silver tongue, a closet full of expensive tailored suits, and a relentless habit of pitching me startup investment opportunities that always sounded suspiciously like pyramid schemes. They were a match made in heaven. Two people completely allergic to hard work, perfectly content to leech off my success while offering nothing but criticism in return. I looked down at the text message from my mother, Patricia, reading it for the third time just to make sure I was not hallucinating. "You are not coming," she wrote. "Madison and Jamal need your suite, with the baby coming. They need the extra space to relax and stretch out. Besides, Jamal's mother is coming now instead, so she can help with the bags. I already transferred your ticket to her name. Consider it a gift to the growing family. Go back to your computers. We will bring you a magnet from Italy." I did not cry. I did not feel a knot in my stomach. When you work in cybersecurity, you learn to suppress panic and analyze the breach immediately. This was not just disrespect. It was a calculated hijacking of my assets. Being told I was not real family by the very people whose lives I financed was a special kind of cruelty. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of replacing me with Jamal's mother on a vacation, I funded a push notification drop down from the top of my phone screen. It was an automated alert from the American Express application. Fraud alert. Charge of $12,450 at Rolex duty-free Miami Airport. Card ending in 4091. Authorized user Patricia. Another notification immediately followed it. Charge approved. $5,200 at the airline desk for a first-class upgrade. They were not just stealing my vacation. They were looting my accounts on the way to the boarding gate. I tapped the phone icon and called my father, Richard. He picked up on the second ring, the loud background noise of the airport terminal buzzing heavily behind him. "Olivia, do not make a scene." Richard snapped before I could even say hello. His voice carried that familiar condescending tone he used whenever I dared to ask for basic respect. "Your mother texted you. You always have your face buried in a laptop anyway. You would not even enjoy the Mediterranean. It is better this way. So just go home and let us enjoy our trip." Dad, I said, my voice dangerously calm, dipping into the cold. Rational register I used when negotiating corporate contracts. Mom just put over $17,000 on my credit card. You gave my cruise ticket to Jamal's mother. What exactly is going on here? Consider it back pay for raising you. Richard scoffed, his arrogance radiating through the speaker. Jamal needed a nice watch for the formal dinners on the ship. He is the man of the family now. He needs to look the part to impress the other guests. And we upgraded his mother's seat because she deserves to travel in comfort. It is called being a good host. Olivia, learn some social grace. In the background, I could hear Jamal's booming laugh. Tell the boss lady. Thanks for the watch, Jamal yelled. Madison chimed in next, whining directly into the receiver. Do not be a brat. Olivia, stop stressing my baby out with your negative energy. I stood by the airport espresso machine, analyzing my next move very carefully. I slowly opened my silver laptop and cracked my knuckles. It was finally time to initiate a complete and total system wipe against them. When you build security architectures for Fortune 500 companies, you learn very quickly that the most devastating threats rarely come from outside hackers trying to break down the front door. The most catastrophic breaches always come from inside the house. They come from authorized users who abuse their access privileges simply because they think no one is watching them. My family thought I was just a walking checkbook who was too busy staring at a screen to ever notice the specific details of my own financial ecosystem. They were about to learn the hard way that staring at screens is exactly how I built an empire. I settled into a quiet corner booth in the first-class lounge, ignoring the bustling travelers around me. I connected my laptop to my encrypted mobile hotspot, bypassing the public airport network entirely to ensure complete privacy. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision. I logged directly into my American Express corporate portal. The secure dashboard loaded instantly, displaying my primary Platinum account and the 2 authorized user cards I had issued years ago. One card belonged to Patricia. The other card belonged to Richard. I had set soft limits on those cards, trusting my parents to use them for groceries, utility bills, and genuine medical emergencies. That blind trust was my first critical failure. I navigated to the Transaction History tab. I did not just look at the current billing cycle. I pulled the data for the last 6 months and exported the entire ledger into a massive master spreadsheet. My eyes scanned the rows and columns of data, my mind shifting completely out of the role of a discarded daughter and entirely into the mindset of a forensic auditor hunting down a massive financial leak. The numbers staring back at me were absolutely staggering. I started filtering the data by category, and the sheer scale of their entitlement made my jaw clenched tight. 2 months ago, there was a charge for $4,500 at a luxury baby boutique in Miami. I pulled up the itemized receipt. It included a designer crib imported from Europe, a high-end stroller system, and custom nursery decor. Madison's lavish baby shower gifts were not provided by our parents out of the goodness of their hearts. They were funded entirely by my business account. While my mother took all the credit for being a generous and supportive grandmother, I scrolled further down the spreadsheet. Last month, there was a charge for $3,200 at a specialized European auto repair shop. Jamal drives a leased luxury BMW that he can barely afford. My parents drive a reliable domestic sedan that I bought for them in cash 3 years ago. The repair bill was clearly for Jamal's car paid for by Patricia, using my emergency credit card to bail out her precious son-in-law. Then I hit the mother lode. 3 weeks ago, there was an $8,000 charge at a digital payment processor known specifically for funneling money into offshore sports betting platforms and sketchy online casinos. I stopped scrolling completely. I highlighted that massive $8,000 charge. Then I wrote a quick sorting script to filter the entire spreadsheet for any transactions matching that specific payment processor over the last year. The screen populated with dozens of rows, $500 here, $1,200 there, $2,000 transferred late on a random Tuesday night. I tallied the column over the span of 12 months. Exactly. $34,800 had been funneled through my mother's authorized user card directly into this gambling payment portal. My mother did not gamble. My father barely knew how to operate the basic functions of a smartphone. But Jamal constantly bragged about high-risk investments and taking bold chances in the market. Jamal was a severe gambling addict, and my parents were letting him use my credit line to fund his habit just to keep their precious golden child Madison happy in her fake, glamorous marriage. They were actively aiding and abetting the theft of my money to maintain the illusion of a wealthy lifestyle for a man who refused to hold down a real job. I felt a cold, cynical smile touch the corners of my mouth. The audacity was almost impressive. They were using my resources to fund Jamal's illegal betting addiction, buying luxury goods at the airport, and then tossing me aside like garbage because I did not fit their aesthetic for a family vacation. They genuinely believed I was just a naive, socially awkward computer nerd who would just pay the bill and stay quiet. They had absolutely no idea the level of digital surveillance I maintained over my own assets. I leaned back in the plush leather chair, letting the harsh reality of the situation wash over me. This was no longer just about a stolen cruise ticket or a display of blatant parental favoritism. This was felony-level credit card fraud. My parents were complicit in draining tens of thousands of dollars from my accounts to support my brother-in-law. The family dynamic was not just toxic. It was a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of family loyalty. My phone buzzed on the table. It was another text message, this time from Madison. She sent a selfie of herself, Jamal, and my parents drinking champagne in the airport departure terminal. The caption read, "Cheers to the baby moon. Thanks for understanding that this trip is just for the core family." I stared at the photo. Jamal was wearing the brand new $12,000 Rolex on his wrist. My mother was holding a designer handbag that I now knew was purchased with my money. They looked so incredibly smug, so completely victorious in their little scheme to push me out of the picture. I did not reply to the message. Engaging with them emotionally was exactly what they wanted. It would give them the satisfaction of calling me crazy, negative, and jealous. I refused to play their game. I was going to play mine. I turned my attention back to the laptop screen. The forensic audit of the credit card was complete. The security breach had been identified, quantified, and meticulously documented. I saved the spreadsheet to an encrypted folder on my hard drive. This was the exact evidence I would need when the time came to drop the hammer on all of them. But the credit card fraud was only the first layer of this investigation. If they were bold enough to steal $35,000 for gambling and luxury watches, what else were they doing behind my back? My mind immediately went to the single largest asset I had entrusted to their care, the house. 2 years ago, I had purchased a beautiful 4-bedroom house in an exclusive Florida suburb for $650,000. I paid entirely in cash. I let my parents live their rent-free because Richard constantly complained that his pension was not enough to cover a decent mortgage in a safe neighborhood. I paid their property taxes. I paid their utility bills. I gave them everything they needed to live comfortably without a single worry. I needed to see exactly what was happening at that property while I was busy running my company. I opened a new browser window and prepared to access the smart home security systems I had installed on the estate. The rabbit hole was about to get much deeper, and I was absolutely ready to uncover every single dirty secret they thought they had successfully buried. When I purchased that $650,000 property in the pristine Florida suburbs 2 years ago, I did not just sign my name on a dotted line and hand over the keys. My brilliant corporate certified public accountant strongly advised against putting personal residential real estate into my own name or gifting it directly to my parents, to shield my primary business assets from any potential liability. I formed a specific limited liability company named Oak Haven Holdings, LLC. LLC. I am the sole managing member and registered agent of that corporate entity. Legally speaking, my own parents were never the actual homeowners. They were effectively month-to-month tenants occupying a corporate-owned asset under an undocumented verbal agreement. They paid no rent, no property taxes, and no homeowners association fees. I covered every single expense to ensure they had a safe, beautiful place to live out their retirement in absolute comfort. I wanted to be a good daughter, the kind who provided stability even when it was never given to her in return. To secure that massive financial investment, I had installed a comprehensive network of Ring doorbell cameras and Nest outdoor security lenses around the entire perimeter of the property. I originally told my parents the system was there strictly to protect them from property theft and monitor package deliveries. To respect their privacy, I had muted all the push notifications on my end, meaning I never actively watched the live feeds unless they reported a specific issue. I simply let the outdoor cameras record quietly to the encrypted cloud storage servers I maintained for my business. Opening the security dashboard now, I bypassed the live feed and pulled up the archived footage from the past 30 days. I set the playback speed to quadruple time and watched the digital timestamps blur across the bottom of the screen. Within 3 minutes of reviewing the accelerated footage, the pattern became undeniably obvious. My parents were not living a quiet suburban life by any stretch of the imagination. Different rental cars were pulling into my sprawling driveway every 3 to 4 days. Large groups of strangers were dragging heavy suitcases up to the mahogany front door. I watched a group of college-aged kids carrying multiple cases of beer and inflatable pool toys directly into the backyard pool area. On the days between these random group arrivals, a professional cleaning van would park in the driveway for exactly 2 hours before leaving. I opened another browser tab and navigated directly to the most popular short-term rental websites. I typed in the specific zip code and filtered for luxury 4-bedroom homes with private pools. It took me less than 30 seconds to find it. There it was. My house listed prominently as a highly rated Superhost property. The title read Luxury Suburban Oasis hosted by Patty and Rich. They were charging $400 a night plus a substantial cleaning fee. The listing photo showed my parents proudly posing in the newly renovated gourmet kitchen I had paid for. According to the glowing reviews, my parents were incredibly welcoming hosts who conveniently stayed in the finished basement apartment during the guests' visits, ensuring total privacy for the renters. They were running an illegal, unlicensed hospitality business on my corporate property, exposing Oak Haven Holdings, LLC, to massive liability risks and pocketing thousands of dollars in pure, untaxed cash every single month. The absolute sheer audacity of the rental scheme was infuriating. But my professional instincts told me to keep digging deeper into the digital archives. If they were brazen enough to commercialize my real estate without permission, they were likely exploiting other physical vulnerabilities on the property. I switched the camera feed from the front porch to the interior garage lens. The 3-car garage was primarily meant for their vehicles, but I had explicitly reserved the third bay as a climate-controlled storage space for my own overflow items. Living in a downtown penthouse meant I had limited closet space, so I kept several vintage mid-century modern furniture pieces and a collection of authentic designer handbags securely boxed up in that Florida garage. I scrubbed through this timeline, jumping back to the previous Tuesday afternoon. The video buffered for a second before revealing a bright orange moving van backed directly up to the open garage doors. I watched as the motion sensor lights clicked on, illuminating the space. Madison waddled into the frame, her pregnant belly prominent beneath a tight designer maternity dress. She was holding an iced coffee in one hand and pointing authoritatively with the other. Jamal stepped into the frame right behind her. He was wearing his usual tailored slacks, looking annoyed as he hauled a heavy metal dolly toward my designated storage area. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing as I watched the high-definition playback reveal their exact movements. Madison directed Jamal straight toward my carefully wrapped belongings. He picked up my authentic vintage credenza, grunting as he wrestled the heavy wooden piece into the back of the moving van. Then Madison herself walked over to the stack of heavy-duty plastic storage bins containing my designer bags. I watched my younger sister pry open the lids, inspect the luxury bags I had purchased to celebrate major business milestones, and casually toss them into the front seat of the moving truck. They were not just borrowing things. They were systematically looting my personal property right out from under me. Madison and Jamal were actively fencing my high V-value assets to fund their fake influencer lifestyle and cover his gambling debts. My parents were entirely complicit, likely looking the other way, or perhaps even giving them the digital access codes to the garage keypad. They were stripping my life for parts, selling off the pieces and using the profits to fund a Mediterranean vacation that I had already paid for. The utter lack of respect was no longer just an emotional wound inflicted by a toxic family. It was a calculated financial assault executed by people who felt completely entitled to everything I owned. I closed the security footage tab. The evidence was secured, downloaded, and safely backed up to my encrypted cloud drive. Every single receipt, every video clip, every fraudulent charge was now locked away in my digital vault. My family had successfully transformed themselves from ungrateful relatives into criminal liabilities. The forensic phase of my investigation was officially over. It was finally time to shift into the offensive strategy and spring the trap they had so arrogantly walked right into without hesitation. The forensic phase of my investigation was officially over. It was finally time to shift into the offensive strategy and spring the trap they had so arrogantly walked right into without hesitation. Tracking a transatlantic flight is incredibly simple when you are the one who purchased the itinerary. I opened the airline tracking application on my phone and watched the tiny airplane icon slowly inch its way across the digital map, hovering right over the Mediterranean Sea. My parents, my sister, her husband, and his mother were currently soaring through the clouds in supreme comfort, drinking complimentary champagne and resting in lie-flat seats. They were completely oblivious to the financial demolition awaiting them on the ground. According to the flight data, they would land at Leonardo da Vinci International Airport in Rome in exactly 2 hours. From there, they had a pre-arranged private black car service waiting to transport them directly to the port of Civit Vecchia. I had booked that car service months ago, paying for it in advance, so they would not have to worry about navigating Italian public transportation. It was a 90-minute drive from the airport to the cruise terminal. That gave me a 3.5-hour window to finalize my preparations. I closed my laptop and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse. The Miami skyline stretched out before me, but my mind was entirely focused on a luxury cruise terminal in Italy. I knew exactly how the boarding process worked for this specific cruise line, because I had meticulously researched every detail when I originally planned the trip for myself. When you book the owner suite, a booking that costs $40,000, you do not stand in the regular boarding lines. You are escorted to a private VIP lounge, where a dedicated concierge handles your passport verification and payment details. That was the exact choke point where my trap would spring shut. Luxury cruise lines operate on a very strict financial protocol. The $40,000 I had already paid covered the suite, the dining packages, and the base gratuities. However, it did not cover the onboard incidentals, things like casino chips, premium spa treatments, medical emergencies, and top-tier liquor require a separate guarantee before the concierge hands over the heavy brass key card to the owner's suite. The primary guest must present a physical credit card. The cruise line then places a mandatory $10,000 authorization hold on that card to ensure all onboard expenses are covered. Patricia was the primary guest on the reservation. Patricia was planning to hand that Italian concierge the American Express Platinum card with her name on it. She was banking on my credit limit to cover that massive incidental hold. She firmly believed that my money was her money, just as she had believed it when she bought the Rolex, and just as she had believed it when she let Jamal gamble away my assets. I walked back to my kitchen island and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I set my phone down on the marble countertop and opened the American Express mobile application. Earlier, I had reduced Patricia and Richard's authorized spending limits to a humiliating $10 before officially freezing the entire account. I wanted to verify that the security protocols were fully active and locked into place. The app displayed a bright red banner across the top of the screen confirming that all new charges would be automatically declined. The digital steel doors were firmly bolted shut. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. If I had confronted them while they were still in Miami, they would have simply driven back to the Florida house, regrouped, and found a new way to manipulate the situation or steal more of my property. They would have played the victims in front of their local friends and spun a narrative about my sudden cruelty. By waiting until they were standing in a cruise terminal in Rome, I was effectively stripping them of all their resources, all their geographical advantages, and all their backup plans. They were thousands of miles away from home, surrounded by strangers, and completely dependent on a piece of plastic that was now totally useless. I imagined the scene playing out at the port of Civitavecchia. They would arrive exhausted, but buzzing with the adrenaline of a luxury vacation. They would strut into the VIP lounge, Jamal likely flashing his stolen watch, Madison complaining about her swollen ankles while demanding priority seating, and my parents acting like royalty. They would approach the concierge desk with absolute arrogance. Patricia would confidently slide the MX card across the polished mahogany counter, expecting the usual differential treatment that comes with flashing premium plastic. The concierge would swipe the card. The terminal would process the request and then the machine would beep. A sharp, undeniable sound of rejection. The concierge would try it again, assuming a simple connection error. They always try it twice. The second decline would prompt a polite but firm request for an alternative method of payment. A different card capable of holding a $10,000 charge. My parents do not have $10,000 in liquid credit. Jamal certainly does not have $10,000. They rely entirely on the illusion of wealth that I provide. Without my card, they are just 5 people standing in a foreign country with luggage they cannot take onto the ship. I picked up my phone and refreshed the flight tracker. The status had changed to landed. The countdown had officially begun. They were navigating Italian customs right now, gathering their bags and looking for the driver holding a sign with their name. My pulse remained remarkably steady. I felt no guilt, no hesitation, and no remorse. They had spent years conditioning me to believe I was nothing more than an obligation, a background character existing solely to facilitate their happiness. Today, they would learn that the background character actually controls the entire script. I sat down at my desk and pulled up a secondary monitor, while I waited for the inevitable explosion in Rome. I had another critical task to execute. The credit card decline was only the immediate shockwave. To truly dismantle their operation and protect myself permanently, I needed to sever their access to my largest asset. I needed to ensure that when they finally managed to crawl back to the United States, they would have absolutely nothing left to exploit. I opened my encrypted email client and composed a new message to my corporate real estate attorney. The financial trap in Italy was officially set and ready to trigger. Now it was time to pull the ground right out from under their feet back home. The time for passive observation was over. The era of Oak Haven Holdings LLC functioning as their personal piggy bank was coming to a definitive and brutal end. I typed the attorney's email address into the recipient line and prepared to make the biggest real estate move of my life. I stared at the blinking cursor in the recipient line for only a fraction of a second before changing my mind. An email was too slow. This level of corporate maneuvering required immediate real-time execution. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct cellular number for David, my lead corporate real estate attorney based out of Miami. David was a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of lawyer who thrived on aggressive negotiations and expedited closings. He had managed the original purchase of the Oak Haven property 2 years ago and knew exactly how the ownership structure was legally fortified. He answered on the second ring. Olivia David said, his voice crisp and alert. To what do I owe the pleasure on a Thursday afternoon? Tell me you are finally ready to expand the commercial portfolio. We are liquidating a residential asset today, I replied, matching his professional cadence. I need you to pull up the file for the Florida property held under Oak Haven Holdings LLC. I heard the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard on his end of the line. Give me 1 second, he said. All right, I have the file open. Are we talking about the primary property where your parents are currently residing? Not anymore, I stated flatly. They have officially vacated the premises for an extended overseas vacation. They took their personal belongings and essentially abandoned the property. I want to sell it immediately. Do you remember that aggressive all-cash corporate offer we received 3 months ago from that major investment firm? The developers who were quietly buying up the entire subdivision to flip it into a gated luxury community. David chuckled a low sound of predatory approval. I remember them vividly. They offered $720,000 in pure liquid cash. They waived all inspections, waived the appraisal contingencies, and wanted to close in record time. You told me to reject the offer because you wanted to keep the house as a stable retirement asset for your family. The strategic objectives of my corporation have officially changed, I told him. I want you to call their lead acquisition agent right now. Tell them Oak Haven Holdings LLC is ready to execute the sale today. The price remains $720,000. However, I have 2 absolute non-negotiable conditions for this transaction. Name them, David said, his tone shifting into pure business mode. First, I said I want this deal closed in 72 hours. I know they have the capital sitting in an escrow account ready to deploy. They can wire the funds directly to my primary business account by Monday morning. Second, they take the property strictly as is, and they take immediate physical possession of the asset the minute the wire clears. They get full legal authorization to completely trash, demolish, or dispose of any remaining garbage left inside the house. David paused. I could hear the gears turning in his highly paid legal mind. Florida tenant rights are usually a nightmare, but since you never executed a formal lease agreement, and they do not pay rent, they are legally classified as month-to-month tenants at will. Since they have left the country, and you are the sole managing member of the LLC, handing over immediate possession to a corporate buyer who accepts the property as is puts the burden entirely on the developers. Those investment firms usually show up with private security and a dumpster on day 1 anyway. They will change the smart locks the second the deed is recorded. Exactly, I replied. They left the property unsecured and actively breached my trust by running an illegal short-term rental business on the premises. They forfeit any protection they thought they had. Make the call. David, get the contracts drawn up. I will have the initial purchase agreement in your inbox within 20 minutes, he promised. Keep your phone close. I ended the call and walked over to my kitchen island, pouring myself another glass of sparkling water. The adrenaline was pulsing through my veins, but it was a cold, calculated energy. I was not acting out of blind rage. I was executing a precise financial amputation. For years, I had allowed them to treat me like a disposable resource, a silent server running in the background of their lives, only acknowledged when they needed to extract funds. They had mistaken my quiet generosity for weakness. They fundamentally misunderstood that the person who builds the infrastructure also holds the power to detonate it. 19 minutes later, my phone vibrated against the marble countertop. An email notification appeared from David's law firm. The subject line read, Urgent Oak Haven Holdings, LLC, Purchase Agreement for Electronic Signature. I opened my laptop and clicked the secure link. The digital document loaded on my high-resolution screen page after page of dense legal jargon that essentially stripped my parents of their sanctuary and transferred it to a faceless corporate entity. The investment firm had agreed to every single term without hesitation. They wanted the land desperately, and my willingness to hand over immediate possession was exactly what they needed to expedite their neighborhood redevelopment project. I scrolled to the final page of the contract. The yellow digital signature box glowed brightly, waiting for my authorization. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked this box, the house in Florida would no longer belong to my company. The manicured lawn, the gourmet kitchen, the spacious bedrooms where my parents had comfortably plotted to steal my cruise vacation. All of it would be gone when they eventually returned from Europe, assuming they could even find a way back without my credit card. They would not be returning home. They would be returning to a corporate construction zone owned by a company that does not care about their sob stories. I positioned the cursor directly over the yellow box. I clicked the trackpad without hesitation. The digital ink dried on the screen, instantly legally binding the sale of the Florida property. I closed the email tab and exhaled a long, measured breath. The trap was fully armed on both continents, across the Atlantic Ocean. My family was blissfully unaware that their suburban sanctuary had just been traded to a corporate developer while they were simultaneously walking into a financial ambush at an Italian seaport. I walked away from the laptop, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and set my phone on the center of the kitchen island. I knew it would not take long. The flight tracker showed they had landed over an hour ago, accounting for customs baggage claim and the private car ride to the port of Civitavecchia. The explosion was imminent. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 42 minutes after I signed the real estate contract. My phone screen illuminated. The custom ringtone I had assigned to my mother began to echo through the quiet expanse of my penthouse. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the rhythmic vibration against the marble countertop before calmly tapping the green answer icon. I did not say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. Olivia. Thank God you answered. Patricia gasped. Her voice was breathless, frantic, and entirely stripped of the arrogant superiority she had displayed during our last conversation at the Miami airport. Olivia. You need to call American Express right this second. There is a massive block on the account, and they are telling me the card is completely restricted. I leaned back against the counter, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Oh, really? I replied, my tone flat and unbothered. That sounds like a frustrating situation for you. It is a total disaster. Patricia hissed, her voice dropping into a harsh, desperate whisper. She was clearly trying to conceal her panic from the people standing around her. We are at the VIP check-in desk for the luxury cruise suites. The concierge swiped the card for the $10,000 incidental hold, and the machine flashed bright red. It declined right in front of everyone. The concierge tried it 3 different times. Olivia. He even wiped the magnetic strip with his tie. It is completely frozen. You need to call the fraud department and authorize this charge right now. I could picture the scene perfectly. The opulent terminal waiting area adorned with marble floors and plush velvet seating. The elite concierge standing behind a polished mahogany desk wearing a crisp white uniform, offering apologies laced with polite corporate judgment. And there stood my mother dressed in her resort wear, sweating profusely as the machine rejected her sole source of financial power. I am not calling anyone, I stated simply. The fraud department did not flag your card. I flagged your card. I logged into the corporate portal and personally revoked your spending privileges. You currently have a limit of exactly $10. You might be able to buy a small bottle of water at the terminal vending machine, but you certainly cannot authorize a $10,000 deposit. There was a moment of dead silence on the line. The background noise of the busy Italian seaport seemed to rush into the gap. I could hear the faint announcements in Italian over the loudspeaker system and the chatter of wealthy tourists embarking on their dream vacations. You did what Patricia choked out her voice, trembling with disbelief and rising anger. Olivia, this is not funny. Stop playing these childish games immediately. Jamal is standing right next to me. Madison is crying because her feet are swollen, and Jamal's mother is watching this entire spectacle unfold. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The concierge just asked us to step out of the VIP line so he could assist the real guests. He told us to move to the side lobby until we can secure a valid method of payment. We are being treated like common criminals in front of Jamal's family. You are common criminals, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. I ran a full forensic audit on my accounts this afternoon. I saw the $12,000 Rolex you bought for your unemployed son-in-law at the duty-free shop. I saw the $5,000 seat upgrades. More importantly, I saw the $35,000 you funneled into offshore gambling accounts over the last year to support Jamal's betting addiction. You stole from my company to fund a fake influencer lifestyle for a man who refuses to work. That money was for family emergencies. Patricia stammered, scrambling to justify her theft. Jamal was going to pay it back. He had a sure thing in the market. He just needed capital. You have so much money. Olivia, you do not even notice it is gone. You are being selfish and vindictive over pennies. Those pennies belong to me, I fired back. And since you felt entitled to steal my money, steal my vacation, and give my $40,000 suite ticket to a woman I have never even met, I felt entitled to cut you off completely. You wanted a trip with just real family. You got exactly what you wanted. But real family does not get to use my American Express Platinum card. Olivia. Please, Patricia begged, abandoning her anger for pure desperation. They will not let us on the ship. The ship departs in exactly 2 hours. If we do not provide a valid credit card for the deposit, they are going to cancel our entire reservation. We will be stranded at the port. Jamal's mother is already asking questions. She thinks we are wealthy. She thinks Madison married into a high society family. If she finds out, we cannot even pay the deposit. Madison will be an absolute laughingstock. You are going to ruin your sister's marriage. Madison ruined her own marriage the second she hitched her wagon to a gambling addict who steals from her sister. I replied. Why do you not ask Jamal to hand over his fancy new $12,000 Rolex? I am sure there is a pawn shop somewhere in Rome that will give him enough cash to cover your cruise deposit. Or, better yet, ask Jamal's mother to put down her own credit card. She is the one taking my suite after all. She should cover the incidentals. She cannot do that, Patricia cried, her voice cracking. She does not have that kind of money. None of us have that kind of money. We relied on you. You relied on my compliance, I corrected. You relied on my silence. You relied on the assumption that I would just absorb the disrespect because I was desperate for your approval. But I am not that girl in the basement anymore. I am the woman who owns the servers, controls the accounts, and holds all the keys. You played a very stupid game, and now you have to face the consequences in front of your precious in-laws. In the background, I could hear a man's voice. It was Jamal, sounding angry and impatient. Patty, what is taking so long? Jamal barked. Tell her to fix the bank error. My mom is getting tired of standing around with the luggage. We need to get on the ship and hit the buffet. Patricia covered the receiver, but I could still hear her frantic whispering. She is not fixing it. Jamal. She froze the account. She knows about the watches and the transfers. What do you mean she knows? Jamal yelled, no longer caring who heard him. Tell her to turn the card back on right now. Tell her we will be stranded here. Patricia came back on the line, her breathing heavy and erratic. Olivia, I am begging you as your mother. Do not do this to us. Do not leave us here in Italy with nothing. If you do not unfreeze this card right now, I will never forgive you. You will destroy this family forever. The family was destroyed a long time ago, I said, staring out at the vibrant Miami skyline. You just did not care because my money was still funding the illusion. The card stays frozen. Enjoy Rome. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cutting off her hysterical, sobbing mid-sentence. I blocked her number immediately. Then I blocked Madison. Then I blocked Richard. I set my phone down on the marble counter, feeling an overwhelming wave of absolute peace wash over my shoulders. The Italian meltdown was fully underway, and they had absolutely no escape route. The phone barely rested on the marble countertop for 60 seconds before it lit up again. I had blocked my mother, my father, and my sister. But the incoming caller ID displayed a generic international number. It was clearly a public courtesy phone from the Italian cruise terminal. Or perhaps Jamal had finally decided to use his own international roaming data. I watched the screen flash brightly. A part of me considered letting it ring into the void. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades swallowing their disrespect, knew that the surgical strike was not quite finished. I had addressed the credit card fraud, but I still needed to expose the absolute depth of my surveillance. I swiped the green icon and brought the speaker to my ear. "Olivia, do not hang up this phone." It was Richard. My father was using his booming authoritative chest voice, the exact same aggressive tone he used to terrify me into submission when I was a teenager. He was attempting to reclaim his position as the unquestioned patriarch of the family. "You are going to log back into that computer right now and remove the block on your mother's card. We are standing in the middle of a foreign country with Jamal's family, watching us be humiliated by Italian port authorities. This childish tantrum ends right this second. Do you hear me?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool surface of the kitchen island. "I hear a man who thinks he still has leverage," I replied, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. "I hear a man who thinks yelling will magically generate $10,000. This is not a game," Richard barked, though I could hear the faint tremor of panic beneath his anger. "You are putting your pregnant sister in a dangerous situation. You are abandoning your family in Europe. We cannot even get a hotel room tonight because the card is frozen. I demand you fix this. We will discuss your little accounting complaints when we get back to Florida." "You are not going back to Florida," I stated simply. "And my complaints are not about accounting. They are about grand larceny." "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded. "Your mother already explained the watch and the upgrades." "I am not talking about the watch," I said, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. "I am talking about Oakhaven Holdings, LLC. I am talking about the 4-bedroom luxury house I allowed you to live in rent-free. Did you honestly think I would purchase a $650,000 corporate asset and not secure it with a monitored surveillance grid?" The line went dead silent. The background noise of the Italian terminal seemed to amplify as my father stopped breathing. I pulled the archive footage from the security cameras today. I continued letting every word land with heavy, undeniable weight. "I watched you and Mom run an unlicensed illegal bed and breakfast out of my corporate property. I saw the college kids carrying beer kegs into the backyard. I saw the professional cleaning crews arriving every 3 days. You have been charging strangers $400 a night to sleep in the house I bought while you hide in the basement and pocket the cash. You turned my generosity into an illicit hospitality business." "Olivia, we can explain," Richard stammered. The authoritative patriarch voice was completely gone, replaced by the stuttering panic of a cornered thief. The pension was not stretching far enough. We just wanted a little extra spending money for the trip. We kept the house perfectly clean. We never let them touch your things." "You are lying again," I said, my voice hardening into a boundary of absolute steel. "You might not have let the renters touch my things, but you certainly let Madison and Jamal touch them." I heard a muffled scramble on the other end of the line. The phone was being wrestled away. Madison's voice suddenly pierced my ear, shrill and hysterical. "Olivia, please. You are scaring Dad. Just turn the card back on so we can get on the ship. We can talk about the house later. I am pregnant. I am so stressed my stomach hurts. You are ruining my baby moon." "How much did you get for the vintage mid-century credenza Madison?" I asked coldly. The hysterical crying stopped instantly. "I watched the garage camera footage from last Tuesday," I explained, picturing her panicked face in the middle of that crowded terminal. I watched you direct Jamal to load my authentic vintage furniture into a moving van. I watched you open my secure storage bins. I watched you physically remove 3 of my authentic Chanel handbags and toss them into the front seat of a truck. You did not just take a vacation on my dime. Madison, you fenced my high V-value assets. You stole my property to fund your fake influencer lifestyle. You are a thief. I was just borrowing them, Madison cried, her voice cracking as the reality of her exposure set in. I needed content for my social media. I was going to bring them back. I swear I was going to bring them back. You do not borrow a massive wooden credenza for a photo, I replied, refusing to give an inch of ground. You sold my property to pay for Jamal's gambling debts because he blew $35,000 of my money on offshore betting sites. You are all completely complicit. Every single one of you knew exactly what you were doing. You thought you could bleed me dry because you assumed I was too desperate for your love to ever fight back. Olivia. Please. My mother's voice returned to the line. She must have grabbed the receiver from Madison. We have no money. We have nowhere to sleep tonight. The cruise ship is leaving without us. Jamal's mother is furious and threatening to call her lawyers. If you do not unfreeze the card, we cannot even buy a plane ticket back to America. You are leaving us stranded. We will do anything. We will pay you back every single cent. Just please do not abandon us here. I looked out the window at the vibrant Miami skyline. For the first time in my 33 years of life, I felt no guilt. I felt no obligation to save them from the consequences of their own malicious actions. The invisible chains of family duty had been thoroughly shattered by their greed. You abandoned me my entire life, I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. You abandoned my emotional needs. You abandoned my accomplishments. You pushed me aside to worship a daughter who steals from me and a son-in-law who gambles away my money. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. But how do we get home? Patricia wailed, her sobs echoing loudly through the phone. Ask Jamal's mother for a loan, I suggested flatly. Since she took my suite, she can take the bill. The American Express card is permanently closed. My bank accounts are secured, and as of this afternoon, my attorneys are officially involved. Do not call this number again. Do not email me. If you manage to find your way back to the United States, do not come looking for me. We are done. Olivia. Wait. No. Please. Patricia screamed. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. The call ended. I blocked the international number immediately. I walked over to the smart home control panel on my wall and turned on my favorite jazz playlist. Letting the smooth, calming music fill the empty space of my penthouse. The boundary of steel was officially constructed, and nothing they could say or do would ever break through it again. They were entirely on their own. Shutting them out of my phone did not mean I stopped watching. When you are a cybersecurity expert, you leave digital tripwires everywhere. I walked back to my laptop and opened the airline portal. I booked their return flights as round-trip tickets on my corporate account. The outbound flight was completed, but the return leg from Rome to Miami was sitting right there in my dashboard. I clicked on the itinerary and selected all 5 passengers: Patricia, Richard, Madison, Jamal, and Beatrice. I hovered over the cancellation button because I purchased fully refundable tickets. The entire balance would instantly bounce back to my corporate account. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed, displaying a bright green checkmark indicating the cancellation was successful. They were officially trapped on another continent. 10 minutes later, the silence was broken by a ping from my laptop. It was an email arriving in my secure corporate inbox. The sender name made me raise an eyebrow. It was Jamal's mother, Beatrice. She had obviously demanded my professional contact information from my panicked parents. The subject line read simply, "What is happening?" I opened the message. The tone was furious and demanding. Olivia Beatrice wrote, "I demand you fix this banking error immediately. We are standing in the lobby of the cruise terminal and the staff is treating us like vagrants. Your mother is having a panic attack. Your father is yelling at the customer service desk. And my son is incredibly embarrassed. We tried to book a hotel for the night and the airline just sent an automated email saying our return flights are canceled. You are ruining a beautiful vacation. Fix the credit card right now before I contact my attorney." I smiled. Beatrice had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was talking to the subservient girl who just paid the bills. She thought Madison was a wealthy influencer and Jamal was a successful investor. She bought into the exact same fake narrative my parents had been selling to everyone in their social circle. It was time to shatter that illusion permanently. I hit reply and began typing my response. Beatrice. I wrote, "There is no banking error. I personally froze the credit card and canceled the return flights. Your son and my sister are not wealthy. They are unemployed and living off my money. Last week, your son stole $35,000 from my accounts to pay off his illegal offshore gambling debts. My sister broke into my secure storage unit and sold my vintage property to fund her fake internet lifestyle. My parents ran an illegal rental business out of the house I bought for them. They are criminals. They gave you my cruise ticket because they wanted to look like generous hosts using my money. You are currently standing in Rome with 4 thieves who have absolutely $0 to their names. Ask your successful son to figure out how to get you home. Have a wonderful day." I clicked send. I leaned back and pictured the absolute devastation that email was going to cause. Beatrice was a proud, status-obsessed woman who thought her son could do no wrong. She had always looked down on my family, thinking Madison was lucky to marry into her lineage. Reading that email would be the equivalent of dropping a tactical bomb on their entire social dynamic. A digital tripwire triggered 20 minutes later. I had set up an alert to monitor public mentions of my sister's influencer handle. Suddenly, a live video notification popped up. It was a random tourist at the cruise terminal who had decided to broadcast the massive public meltdown happening right next to the VIP lounge. I clicked the link. The shaky cell phone video loaded. There they were, standing in the middle of the crowded Italian terminal. The majestic cruise ship was visible through the massive glass windows behind them. My family was surrounded by their towering stacks of designer luggage, looking utterly disheveled. Beatrice was shoving her phone directly into my mother's face, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Is this true?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing off the high marble ceilings. "Is my son a gambling addict? Are you people completely broke? You told me you bought this vacation. You told me Madison was a successful partner. You people are frauds. You are nothing but thieves." Madison was sobbing uncontrollably, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She reached out to grab Jamal's arm, but Beatrice slapped her hand away. "Do not touch my son," Beatrice yelled, turning her fury onto Jamal next. "You told me you were making millions. Take that stolen watch off right now before I call the Italian police myself." My father was trying to intervene, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. But 2 armed Italian port security officers were already approaching the group. They were speaking sternly in Italian, gesturing toward the exit doors. They were kicking them out of the terminal. The golden child, Madison, the sister who spent her entire life making me feel like a worthless outsider, was having a hysterical breakdown in front of hundreds of wealthy tourists, being humiliated by her mother-in-law, and getting escorted off the premises by armed guards. The video abruptly ended as the tourists stopped recording. The facade was completely shattered. Madison's perfect image was burned to ashes in front of the one person whose approval she craved most. They had no access to my funds. They had no return flights. They had no hotel reservations. They were stranded on a continent they did not understand, forced to face the absolute destruction of their own lives. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. Now they had to pay their own way back. I closed the laptop and walked out to my balcony, letting the warm Miami breeze wash over my face. The first phase of my retaliation was a spectacular success. The physical reality of their situation in Rome was unfolding exactly as my predictive models had accurately anticipated. I did not need a live camera feed to know the utter desperation setting in as they stood on the hot Italian pavement outside the cruise terminal. Their designer luggage, previously a symbol of their manufactured status, was now a heavy burden they had to drag across the unforgiving cobblestones. The armed guards had ensured they were completely removed from the port property. There was no comfortable lounge, no complimentary drinks, and absolutely no luxury shuttle waiting to whisk them away safely into the warm, humid Italian summer evening. Beatrice was the first to defect, using her own pristine credit card. She hailed a private taxi and booked herself a direct flight back to Atlanta, abandoning her son and her new in-laws without a second backward glance. She made it perfectly clear that Jamal was entirely on his own. My father, Richard, who had spent the last 30 years acting like a formidable corporate titan, suddenly found his pockets entirely empty. His own credit cards were maxed out from maintaining the illusion of wealth back in Florida. Patricia was weeping into her hands, completely immobilized by the public humiliation and the sudden evaporation of her financial safety net. That left Jamal, the smooth-talking entrepreneur, was finally forced to confront the reality of his own depleted checking accounts. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he logged into his banking application. The offshore gambling platforms had bled his liquid assets dry. He had less than $4,000 to his name. $4,000 had to transport 4 adults from Italy to Miami at the absolute last minute. There would be no direct flights. There would be no extra legroom. There would be no upgraded meals. Jamal stood on the sidewalk sweating through his expensive tailored suit, desperately refreshing discount travel websites. He was booking the absolute cheapest, most grueling itinerary available. He secured 4 tickets on a budget airline known for charging extra for carry-on bags and printing boarding passes. The route he was forced to choose was an absolute logistical nightmare. They would fly from Rome to a secondary airport in Frankfurt, wait during a 9-hour overnight layover flight to Toronto, endure another 6-hour layover, and finally catch a connecting flight down to Florida. The misery commenced immediately. They had to haul their massive designer suitcases onto a crowded public bus just to reach the airport. Madison, accustomed to being treated like royalty during her pregnancy, complained loudly about the heat, the smell, and her aching back. Patricia snapped at her to be quiet, the stress fracturing their usually impenetrable mother-otter alliance. Richard remained sullen and silent, humiliated by his inability to control the situation. At the check-in counter, the budget airline hit them with exorbitant fees for their overweight luxury baggage. Jamal watched his remaining bank balance dwindle down to double digits just to get their bags on the plane. When they finally boarded the aircraft, the reality of economy class settled over them like a thick, suffocating blanket. They were crammed into the very back row of the plane, situated right next to the lavatories. The seats did not recline. There was barely enough room for Richard's knees. Madison spent the entire flight crying quietly into a thin, scratchy airline blanket. Jamal stared blankly at the seat back in front of him, the shiny $12,000 Rolex on his wrist, serving as a heavy, mocking reminder of the theft that had triggered this entire collapse. Every time the beverage cart passed by, they had to decline purchasing anything because Jamal's debit card was virtually tapped out. The Frankfurt layover broke whatever remaining spirit they had left. Because Jamal could not afford a hotel, they were forced to sleep on hard metal benches in the terminal. Patricia, who just 24 hours ago was bragging about her upcoming Mediterranean spa treatments, tried to use her designer handbag as a pillow while shivering under the harsh fluorescent airport lighting. Richard paced the terminal for hours, his pride completely shattered. Madison threw a tantrum, demanding food, forcing Jamal to spend his last remaining dollars on stale airport sandwiches and bottled water. The hostility between Jamal and Madison escalated into a vicious, whispered argument that ended with Jamal walking away to sit in a different concourse. By the time they boarded the flight to Toronto, they looked like completely different people. Their expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained. Their perfect hair was a mess. The arrogant smirks they had worn in that airport selfie back in Miami were entirely erased. The transatlantic flight was turbulent, adding physical nausea to their profound emotional distress. They sat in stony silence, completely disconnected from one another, united only by their shared misery and the exhausting reality of their 50-hour journey. As the final plane descended toward the humid Florida coastline, a tense, nervous energy settled over the four of them. They had survived the grueling transit, but they knew the conflict was far from over. They assumed they were simply returning to the safety of the suburban house to regroup, lick their wounds, and formulate a new strategy to manipulate me. They thought fake apologies and manufactured tears from Madison would eventually wear me down and restore access to my bank accounts. They were desperate to get back to the driveway, unlock the front door, and collapse into their comfortable beds. They had absolutely no idea that their sanctuary no longer existed. The legal machinery I had set in motion was already grinding their reality into dust. As their flight touched down on the tarmac, the real estate transaction entered its final irreversible phase. They were flying back to a life that had been entirely dismantled while they were trapped in the sky, completely unaware of the devastating legal trap closing tightly around them now. While my family endured the crushing reality of budget economy seating somewhere over the Atlantic seaboard, my own reality played out on the glowing monitors of my home office. I watched the digital clock in the corner of my screen tick closer to the opening of the financial markets. The legal machinery I had set in motion was operating with absolute and ruthless efficiency. David, my corporate real estate attorney, had successfully expedited the title search, cleared the deed transfer, and pushed the paperwork through the county clerk office system. The transaction was moving forward without any hesitation whatsoever today. There were no contingencies to clear, no inspections to schedule, and absolutely no delays allowed. The corporate development firm wanted this land immediately, and I was giving them exactly what they paid for, at exactly 9 a.m. Standard Eastern Time. A notification chimed loudly from my encrypted email client. It was an automated message from the escrow company handling the deal. The bold subject line read, "Escrow dispersed Oak Haven property." I immediately opened my primary corporate banking application and watched the secure screen load. The financial dashboard refreshed, updating my available balances with beautiful, undeniable, and stunning mathematical clarity. $720,000 had successfully landed in the operating account of Oak Haven Holdings, LLC. The transaction was complete, irrevocable, and entirely legally binding. I transferred the funds directly into my diversified investment portfolio with 3 quick keystrokes. The money was now secured behind biometric firewalls, completely inaccessible to anyone but me. The Florida house, the manicured lawns, the gourmet kitchen where my mother had happily spent my money. None of it belonged to my company anymore. It was now the exclusive property of a billion-dollar real estate conglomerate that cared nothing about familial drama whatsoever. David called me less than 5 minutes after the funds cleared my accounts. "The electronic deed is officially recorded," he stated, his voice ringing with professional satisfaction. "Oak Haven Holdings, LLC, is completely divested from the residential asset. The buyer property management team has already dispatched their field agents to secure the premises. They are not wasting a single second. Olivia, they want to begin the demolition prep work before the end of the month." I thanked David for his exceptional speed and ended the call. The execution was flawless, leaving no room for my parents to fight back today. Out of pure morbid curiosity, I opened the security dashboard on my laptop one final time. The cloud access to the Ring doorbell and the outdoor Nest cameras was still active, as I had not yet transferred the digital administrative rights to the new corporate owners. I wanted to witness the exact moment the transition of power became a physical reality on the ground. I did not have to wait long. A fleet of 3 heavy-duty commercial trucks pulled into the wide driveway. They were completely unconcerned with the pristine landscaping my parents had previously bragged about maintaining beautifully. A crew of 6 men wearing high-visibility construction vests stepped out of the vehicles. They were the property management enforcement team, and they operated with military precision. The lead agent approached the front door holding a thick stack of legal documents attached to a clipboard. He did not bother ringing the doorbell. He immediately signaled for a locksmith to step forward. I watched through the high-definition lens as the technician pulled out an industrial drill and completely destroyed the expensive smart lock I had installed 2 years ago. The brass cylinder shattered, falling to the porch floor instantly. The heavy wooden door swung wide open. The house was successfully breached not by criminals, but by the rightful legal owners. The enforcement team marched inside with empty cardboard boxes and thick rolls of packing tape. I switched the camera feed to the interior garage lens, the same camera that had captured Madison and Jamal stealing my vintage designer bags just days ago. The crew entered the garage and immediately began assessing the remaining items. According to the contract, the buyers took the property strictly as is, meaning anything left inside was officially considered abandoned commercial refuse permanently starting today. They did not handle my parents' belongings with care. There was no gentle wrapping of fragile items or careful folding of expensive clothes. The workers grabbed Patricia's designer shoes, Richard's golf clubs, and Madison's remaining nursery decorations, tossing them aggressively into the cheap cardboard boxes. They were clearing the house at maximum speed, throwing everything into a massive rented storage unit truck parked outside. The beautiful suburban illusion my family had cultivated was being systematically dismantled and stuffed into brown paper boxes by men getting paid minimum wage. The poetic justice of the moment was incredibly satisfying to watch unfold, once the house was entirely emptied of their personal garbage. The property management team moved on to the final phase of securing the asset. They installed heavy-duty industrial deadbolts on every single exterior door. The locksmith tested each new lock, ensuring the property was practically impenetrable. Then the lead agent walked out to the front yard carrying a large wooden sign attached to a metal post. He drove the post deep into the manicured grass right next to the driveway entrance. The bright red letters on the white sign were clearly visible from the street and adjacent public sidewalk. The warning sign read, "Private property trespassing prohibited violators will be prosecuted." I smiled as I watched the crew pack up their equipment and drive away, leaving the house locked empty and legally fortified against any unauthorized entry. The camera feed suddenly went dark. The new owners had finally disconnected the local internet router, severing my digital connection to the property permanently. I closed my laptop and took a deep, calming breath. The financial trap had fully snapped shut. When my exhausted family finally arrived back in Florida, they would be walking straight into an absolute legal nightmare starting tonight. The screen of my laptop reflected perfectly in the dark glass of the penthouse windows. The digital connection to the property was permanently severed. The new corporate buyers operated with brutal efficiency, and their property management team sent a follow-up email exactly 1 hour after the camera feeds went dark. The email contained an inventory manifest, a digital photograph of a rusted padlock, and the address of a discount public storage facility located 30 miles outside the wealthy suburban bubble my parents were accustomed to. The location was notoriously sketchy, surrounded by abandoned strip malls and industrial warehouses. I opened the attachment. The management crew had dumped every single cardboard box into a 10 by 10 unventilated concrete unit. Patricia's expensive resort wear, Richard's custom golf clubs, and the remnants of Madison's stolen nursery items were now baking in the sweltering Florida heat behind a cheap aluminum roll-up door. The email included the rental agreement for the first 30 days paid for by the management company as a legal courtesy to avoid destruction of property lawsuits. After 30 days, the unit would go to public auction. The physical key to the padlock had been dropped into a certified postal envelope and mailed to my corporate attorney. David would hold it until my family legally requested their belongings. I was not going to make it easy for them to retrieve their garbage, with the physical eraser complete. I moved on to the digital utility accounts. For 2 years, I had quietly paid the electric, water, trash, and high-speed internet bills for that massive 4-bedroom house. I logged into the regional power company portal and navigated to the service termination page. I clicked the button to finalize the closure of the account. Then I did the same for the municipal water supply. Finally, I canceled the premium fiber optic internet service that Madison used to upload her fake influencer lifestyle posts. The house was now a complete dead zone. It had no power, no running water, and no connectivity. It was an empty corporate shell waiting for the demolition crews. My phone buzzed on this kitchen island. It was an alert from the flight tracking application I had left running in the background. The budget airline carrying my family had officially entered Florida airspace. They were beginning their final descent into the regional airport. I pictured the absolute state of misery they must be in right now. They had spent the last 2 days sleeping on hard metal benches in Germany and surviving on stale airport food. They were unwashed, exhausted, and completely stripped of their arrogant hostility. Patricia was likely clutching her counterfeit designer purse, dreaming about collapsing into the plush king-size mattress in the master bedroom. Richard was probably grinding his teeth, plotting exactly how he would yell at me over the phone tomorrow to demand his allowance reinstated. Madison and Jamal were surely whispering complaints to each other, already scheming a new way to manipulate my emotions and extract more cash for their upcoming baby expenses. They all shared a singular, comforting delusion. They genuinely believed the house was still waiting for them, an untouchable fortress where they could hide from the consequences of their actions. The airplane wheels touched down on the humid Florida runway. I felt a surge of cold anticipation rush through my chest. They were on the ground. The final countdown had officially started. They had to navigate the crowded regional airport, wait endlessly at the baggage claim for their heavy designer suitcases, and figure out how to get back to the suburbs. Jamal had completely drained his checking accounts just to purchase those miserable economy tickets. He did not have enough funds remaining to order a premium black car service. They would be forced to hail a standard yellow taxicab or squeeze into a cheap shared airport shuttle hauling their luggage with aching arms. Every single step of their journey home was designed to drain their physical and mental energy. By the time they reached the property line, they would be running on absolute empty. The sun was already beginning to set over the Miami skyline, painting the clouds in vivid shades of orange and dark purple. The suburban streets around the Oak Haven property would be falling into twilight shadows. Because I had canceled the electrical service, the decorative landscape lighting and the motion sensor porch lamps would not turn on to welcome them back. The house would be pitch black, silent, and deeply unwelcoming. I walked away from my office setup and moved to the spacious living room of my penthouse. I poured a fresh glass of sparkling water and settled into the plush velvet sofa. There was nothing left for me to do but wait for the inevitable explosion. The trap was flawless. The legal documentation was airtight. The financial accounts were fortified behind impossible biometric security walls. They had absolutely zero leverage left to exploit. I thought about the years I spent desperately trying to earn a single word of validation from Richard. I remembered the countless times Patricia had humiliated me at family dinners to make Madison shine brighter. I recalled every single pyramid scheme Jamal had pitched me with a smug, disrespectful grin. They had taken my generosity and twisted it into an entitlement. They had crossed the final boundary when they decided to abandon me at the airport and steal a $40,000 vacation to celebrate their own greed. The taxi carrying my family was likely pulling onto the highway right now. The distance between the airport and the suburban neighborhood was exactly 25 meters, depending on the evening traffic. They had about 40 minutes before their reality shattered completely. 40 minutes until the taxi pulled up to a dark property. 40 minutes until they saw the bright red warning signs planted firmly in the front yard. 40 minutes until they realized the smart locks had been violently drilled out and replaced with heavy industrial deadbolts. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the absolute silence of my home. The storm was coming for them, and I was entirely out of its destructive path. The yellow taxicab turned the corner onto the pristine suburban street, its headlights cutting through the heavy Florida humidity. The wealthy neighborhood was exceptionally quiet, filled with the soft hum of air conditioning units and the distant chirp of crickets. Every other house on the block glowed with warm porch lights and illuminated landscape features. But as the taxi rolled to a stop at the end of the familiar cul-de-sac, it parked in front of a property completely swallowed by shadows. The Oak Haven house sat in total darkness, inside the cramped vehicle. The atmosphere was suffocating. Patricia rubbed her aching neck, her fake designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. Richard let out a loud groan of pure frustration as he forced the stiff car door open. Madison immediately began complaining about her swollen ankles, demanding that Jamal hurry up and grab her heavy suitcases from the trunk. Jamal practically threw the remaining crumpled dollar bills at the annoyed driver. He did not even leave a single tip. The taxi sped away instantly, leaving the four of them standing at the end of the long driveway, enveloped by the sticky evening heat and the absolute silence of the neighborhood. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered, pulling his suit jacket tight around his shoulders despite the warm weather. Olivia must have thrown another childish tantrum and canned the automatic payments for the power bill just to inconvenience us. "I will be calling her bank the second I get inside." Patricia sighed heavily, dragging her rolling luggage across the concrete. "Just open the door." "Richard, I cannot stand out here for another second. My feet are covered in blisters from those awful airport benches. I need a hot shower and a large glass of wine before I completely lose my mind." They began their miserable march up the long driveway, the plastic wheels of their heavy luggage rattling loudly against the pavement. Madison leaned heavily on Jamal, whining about the lack of walkway lights. The thick darkness made the familiar path feel strangely imposing. As they approached the manicured front lawn, the beam of a street lamp caught the edge of something new. A large wooden post had been driven deep into the grass, positioned directly in their path to the front porch. Richard stopped abruptly. He squinted into the dim lighting, trying to make out the shape. Jamal bumped into him from behind, dropping a heavy suitcase with a loud thud. "What is that thing?" Madison asked, her voice cracking with exhaustion and growing anxiety. "Why is there a sign in our yard?" Jamal pulled out his smartphone and turned on the flashlight application. He aimed the bright white beam directly at the wooden post. The harsh light illuminated the bold red letters painted across the white metal plate. "Private property trespassing. Prohibited violators will be prosecuted." Patricia let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. It must be a mistake. The neighborhood association probably put it in the wrong yard. You know how incompetent those board members are. "Richard, just ignore it and get the door open. I am entirely too exhausted to deal with a homeowners association mix-up tonight." But Richard did not move. He was staring at the sign, his jaw clenching tight. The name stamped at the very bottom of the warning plaque did not belong to the local homeowners association. It belonged to a major corporate property management firm. A cold sense of dread began to snake its way down his spine. Though his immense pride refused to acknowledge it, he pushed past the sign and marched heavily up the concrete steps to the wide front porch. Patricia, Madison, and Jamal followed closely behind him, dragging their bags up the stairs. The porch was covered in deep shadows. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy keychain. He reached forward in the dark, his fingers searching for the familiar sleek glass surface of the electronic smart lock I had installed 2 years ago, instead of smooth glass. His hand scraped against rough, jagged metal. He snatched his hand back, letting out a sharp curse. Jamal stepped up beside him, shining the phone flashlight directly onto the doorframe. The elegant digital keypad was completely gone. In its place was a massive, brutal industrial deadbolt. The wood around the lock was splintered and scarred, clear evidence that the previous hardware had been violently drilled out and forcibly removed. "What is this?" Richard yelled, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet suburban street. "Where is the keypad who changed the locks on my house?" Patricia pushed her way to the front, her eyes wide with sudden terror. She grabbed the heavy brass doorknob and rattled it aggressively. The door did not budge a single millimeter. It was locked tight, fortified like a commercial bank vault. She pounded her fist against the thick wood. "Hello, is anyone in there?" "Open this door immediately." Madison started hyperventilating, clutching her pregnant stomach as she leaned against the porch railing. "Jamal, do something!" she shrieked. "Break the door down! We need to get inside. I cannot sleep outside. I need my bed. I need my things." Jamal pressed his face against the narrow glass panel situated right next to the heavy front door. He cupped his hands around his eyes to block out the glare of his phone flashlight, peering deep into the dark interior of the house. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the grand foyer in the sprawling living room beyond. He froze. The phone in his hand began to tremble. "What is it?" Patricia demanded, grabbing his shoulder and trying to look past him. "What do you see?" "It is gone," Jamal whispered, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant swagger. He backed away from the window, his face looking hollow and pale in the harsh flashlight beam. "Everything is gone." Patricia shoved him aside and pressed her own face against the glass. Richard moved to the adjacent window, wiping away the condensation with his sleeve. They both stared into the belly of the house. The luxurious velvet sofas were missing. The expensive Persian rugs had vanished. The massive flat-screen television, the dining table, the artwork on the walls. Absolutely every single trace of their existence had been completely scrubbed from the premises. The house was entirely empty. It was a hollow shell of drywall and bare hardwood floors. It looked exactly like a commercial property waiting for a demolition crew. "My clothes!" Madison screamed, dropping her designer bag and rushing to the window. "My baby nursery! Where is all my stuff? Where did everything go?" Patricia stumbled backward, her knees giving out. She collapsed onto one of the large suitcases, burying her face in her hands as a loud, guttural sob ripped through her chest. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the illusion of her wealthy, comfortable life had just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Richard stood perfectly still, his fists clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles turned completely white. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Olivia had not just canceled a vacation. She had not just frozen a credit card. She had systematically liquidated the very ground beneath their feet. The house was sold. The locks were changed. They were officially homeless, standing on a dark porch in the middle of the night. Surrounded by luggage they could no longer afford to carry anywhere else. The silent, seething fury inside Richard finally boiled over, completely destroying his last shred of logic and setting the stage for a truly disastrous physical reaction. The silent fury inside Richard boiled over, destroying his last shred of logic. He refused to accept that he had been outsmarted by the daughter he considered an afterthought. The veins in his neck bulged against his sweat-soaked collar. This property was his domain. This was the fortress where he proudly played the role of wealthy patriarch. The mere idea that Olivia could erase his existence with a few strokes of a keyboard was a profound insult his ego could not process. He turned away from the deadbolt and marched toward the porch. "Richard, what are you doing?" Patricia cried out, her voice trembling as she watched her husband pace along the brick perimeter. "Just stop for a second and let us think clearly. We need to call a hotel. We need to call a lawyer. We cannot stand out here complaining." "I am not going to any hotel," Richard spat back. "I am going inside my house right now. That ungrateful brat thinks she can lock me out of my own home. I am going to get inside and sleep on the floor if I have to." Jamal stepped forward quickly, holding his hands up defensively. "Hey man, maybe we should back up a minute and breathe." The sign out front clearly said trespassing is prohibited. If she sold the place to a corporation, they do not play around with intruders. Let us walk to the main road and call a cab. Do not ever tell me what to do." Richard roared, turning his fierce anger onto his son-in-law. "You are the sole reason we are in this mess. If you had not gambled away her money, she never would have checked the accounting records. You are a parasite. Jamal, you ruined everything we built. Now get out of my way before I make you move." Jamal took a quick step back, raising his hands in surrender. Madison let out a sharp wail, burying her face in his shoulder. Richard ignored all of them. He scanned the dark landscaping near the side of the house. The property management company had cleared away most of the decorative planters, but they left behind a heavy concrete garden stone. Richard marched over to the dirt and hoisted the concrete stone into his bare hands. Patricia screamed as she realized exactly what he was about to do. "Richard! No! Have you lost your mind? Put that stone down right now before you get us arrested." Richard did not listen. He carried the heavy stone straight up to the side window of the formal dining room. This specific window was tucked away safely behind a tall row of privacy hedges, hidden completely from the direct view of the quiet suburban street. He raised the concrete stone high above his right shoulder, his face contorting violently into a mask of pure rage. He swung his arms forward rapidly with all the raw strength he could muster. The stone crashed directly into the center of the reinforced glass pane. The loud sound of shattering glass tore brutally through the peaceful suburban silence. Razor-sharp shards exploded inward, raining down heavily onto the bare hardwood floors of the empty dining room. Richard reached his bare hand carefully through the jagged hole, ignoring a sharp scrape against his forearm, and fumbled blindly for the interior latch. He flipped the metal locking mechanism and shoved the window frame upward. He hoisted his body up onto the windowsill, his expensive dress pants tearing loudly against the splintered wood frame. He tumbled forward, landing heavily on the hard floor inside the dark, echoing house. The air inside felt incredibly stale, carrying the distinct chemical scent of industrial cleaning supplies. He stood up quickly, brushing sharp glass shards from his sleeves, and turned to look back out the window. "Hand me the bags," Richard commanded, his voice echoing eerily through the completely vacant structure. "We are sleeping in here tonight. I do not care if we sleep on the bare wooden floor. I am not letting her lock me out." Patricia, trembling violently in the humid night air, began to push the first designer suitcase nervously toward the broken window. What Richard failed to understand was that corporate property management firms do not just rely on basic deadbolts and wooden signs to secure their newly acquired multi-million-dollar assets. When the demolition crews finished their sweep earlier that afternoon, they deliberately activated a highly sophisticated temporary commercial security matrix designed specifically to protect vacant properties from squatters. This modern system did not utilize loud blaring sirens or flashing red lights that would alert the intruder. It was designed to trap, not to deter. The exact microcond. The dining room window glass shattered. An acoustic sensor mounted directly on the ceiling registered the specific frequency of breaking glass. Instantly, an invisible digital relay engaged. The infrared motion sensors scattered throughout the empty hallways instantly detected Richard's physical presence the exact moment his heavy feet hit the hardwood floor. There was no warning noise. There was no flashing light. The house remained completely dark and totally silent. But deep within the digital infrastructure of the property, a high-priority emergency distress signal was instantly transmitted directly to the local police department dispatch center. The automated digital alert immediately flagged a confirmed perimeter breach, a verified break in progress, and an active trespassing violation at a commercial holding. As Richard wiped the thick, heavy sweat from his forehead and reached out to grab the next suitcase from his crying wife, He was entirely oblivious to the severe legal reality of his current situation. He genuinely thought he had successfully forced his way back into his comfortable suburban castle. He had actually just locked himself very tightly inside a high-security corporate trap. The silent countdown had already begun, and heavily armed law enforcement vehicles were already speeding dangerously through the dark streets toward the quiet Koldiak without hesitation. The heavy canvas fabric of the designer suitcase caught sharply on the jagged glass remaining in the window frame. Richard grunted, his muscles straining as he attempted to yank the baggage through the narrow opening. He was completely focused on the physical exertion, entirely unaware of the synchronized tactical response converging on his exact location. The quiet suburban street, usually characterized by peaceful cricket chirps and gentle evening breezes, was abruptly flooded with a blinding, disorienting array of intense red and blue strobe lights. 4 local police cruisers had turned onto the Kulak with their sirens intentionally deactivated, a standard tactical procedure for an active confirmed commercial burglary in progress. The vehicles skidded to a sudden halt, positioning themselves in a strategic semicircle that entirely blocked the wide concrete driveway. The blinding glare of high-intensity police spotlights instantly illuminated the front lawn, casting long, dramatic shadows across the grass and pinning my family in a harsh, inescapable circle of artificial daylight. Patricia let out a blood-curdling shriek, dropping her heavy purse onto the driveway. The sudden arrival of law enforcement shattered the quiet night. Car doors flew open simultaneously. 6 heavily armed police officers stepped out from behind their fortified vehicle doors, their service weapons drawn and leveled directly at the front porch. The chaotic scene playing out before them looked exactly like a textbook felony break-in. A shattered window, an adult male attempting to haul luggage into an empty house, and accomplices standing watch on the lawn. "Step away from the window and show me your hands right now." A commanding voice boomed through a heavy police bullhorn. The amplified sound echoed violently across the wealthy neighborhood, undoubtedly waking every single resident on the block. I repeat, drop the bag and step away from the building immediately. Keep your hands where we can see them. Richard froze perfectly still, his body caught awkwardly half inside the dining room and half outside on the exterior ledge. The bright spotlights blinded him completely, forcing him to squint against the aggressive glare. He dropped the designer suitcase, letting it fall heavily to the dark hardwood floor inside the empty house, and slowly raised his bleeding hands into the air. "Officers, there is a massive misunderstanding here," Richard yelled back, his voice cracking with a mixture of sheer terror and lingering misplaced arrogance. "I am the homeowner. I live here. This is my property. I just lost my keys." "Do not move," the lead officer shouted back, completely ignoring Richard's frantic explanation. "Corporate Property Management dispatched this call. The building is legally vacant. Get down on the ground right now. Face down on the grass. All of you. Do it now." Jamal did not hesitate. He had grown up understanding exactly how quickly situations with armed police officers could escalate. He immediately dropped to his knees on the manicured lawn, interlacing his fingers tightly behind his head and lowering his face directly into the damp grass. Madison shrieked in absolute horror, clutching her pregnant stomach as she backed away toward the driveway. "I am pregnant," Madison wailed hysterically, her voice echoing down the street. "Do not shoot us. Please do not shoot us. We are just trying to get into our house. My sister is the owner." 2 officers moved rapidly across the lawn with tactical precision. They bypassed Madison entirely, recognizing she posed no immediate physical threat, and descended directly upon Jamal and Richard. An officer grabbed Jamal firmly by the shoulders, pressing him flat against the turf. The sharp, unmistakable metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed clearly through the humid night air. Jamal was securely detained in seconds, his face pressed uncomfortably into the dirt. On the porch, another pair of officers grabbed Richard roughly by the arms, dragging him away from the shattered window frame. They forced him down the concrete steps, Richard struggled slightly against their grip, his wounded pride severely clouding his judgment. "Get your hands off me," Richard demanded, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a respected corporate executive. You are making a terrible mistake. You are going to lose your jobs for this. Stop resisting or you will be charged with assaulting an officer." The cop barked back, swiftly, kicking Richard's legs apart and forcing him face down onto the lawn right next to Jamal. Another set of heavy steel handcuffs snapped securely around Richard's wrists. The once formidable patriarch was now completely immobilized on his own former front lawn and restrained like a common criminal. Patricia completely lost her mind. The sight of her husband and her golden son-in-law pinned to the ground in handcuffs completely short-circuited her brain. She abandoned her luggage and sprinted frantically toward the officers, waving her arms in the air like a mad woman. "Let them go," Patricia screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "This is my house. I live here. I have lived here for 2 years. Check the mail. Check the neighbors. Ask anyone on this street. We are the homeowners. You are arresting the wrong people. Ma'am, step back immediately." A female officer commanded, stepping firmly into Patricia's path and holding up a bright tactical flashlight. "If you interfere with an active felony arrest, you will be placed in handcuffs as well. Step back right now." Patricia refused to listen. She was entirely consumed by panic and the absolute destruction of her social standing. The neighbors across the street were already turning on their porch lights, stepping out in their pajamas to witness the spectacular downfall of the neighborhood's most arrogant residents. "You do not understand," Patricia cried, tears streaming rapidly down her flushed face. "My daughter bought this house for us. She is just throwing a temper tantrum because we went on a cruise without her. Call Olivia. Just call my daughter. She will tell you this is all a huge mistake. We are not burglars. We are a wealthy family." The lead officer walked over, holstering his weapon, but keeping his hand resting cautiously on his duty belt. "Ma'am, we received an automated distress signal directly from the commercial security matrix installed by Oak Haven Holdings, LLC. The registered property management firm confirmed this address was fully vacated, legally sold and secured earlier today. The new corporate owners explicitly requested immediate prosecution for any trespassers." "That is a lie," Patricia shrieked, stomping her foot on the pavement. "Oak Haven is just a fake company name my daughter uses. She owns the house. She is just trying to punish us for a family disagreement. I demand you call her right now. Look up Olivia in your system. She will clear this up instantly." The officer pulled a small radio microphone to his shoulder, pressing the button to communicate with the Central Dispatch Center. He requested a rapid verification check on the legal ownership records for the specific property address. The entire family waited in agonizing suspense, surrounded by flashing police lights, assuming that my name would magically appear on the police database and instantly rescue them from this nightmare. 10 seconds later, the dispatcher's voice crackled loudly through the officer's shoulder radio, projecting clearly into the quiet night air. The legal ownership data had updated perfectly within the county clerk system just hours ago. Dispatch confirming the robotic voice announced, "Property is legally registered to Apex Commercial Development Group. Deed transfer was finalized at 9 this morning. There is absolutely no individual named Olivia associated with the current legal title. Suspects are trespassing on private commercial property. Proceed with standard felony detainment." Patricia's knees buckled completely. She collapsed onto the concrete driveway, sobbing uncontrollably as the absolute terrifying truth finally crashed down upon her. The house was gone. The money was gone. The power was gone. They were entirely at the mercy of the criminal justice system, and the police officers were now moving in to formally read them their Miranda rights. The heavy metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly through the humid Florida night as the lead officer began reciting the Miranda rights to Richard and Jamal. Patricia was a crumpled, sobbing mess on the concrete driveway, unable to process the absolute destruction of her suburban kingdom. Madison stood frozen near the edge of the lawn, staring blankly at her husband, who was currently pinned face down in the damp grass. The officers moved with practiced clinical efficiency, treating my once arrogant family like common street criminals. A pair of brilliant LED headlights swept across the dark cul-de-sac. A sleek black luxury SUV rolled smoothly past the line of parked police cruisers, its engine humming with quiet power. The vehicle came to a deliberate stop directly behind the primary police barricade, perfectly positioned under the glow of the street lamp. The heavy tinted driver's side door swung open, and I stepped out onto the pavement. I did not look like a daughter rushing to a family emergency. I was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white silk blouse. I looked exactly like what I was, a high-level corporate executive arriving to oversee the final execution of a hostile takeover. My heels clicked rhythmically against the asphalt as I bypassed the flashing red and blue lights and walked directly toward the chaotic scene playing out on the front lawn. Patricia lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes locked onto me, widening in a sudden, desperate surge of absolute relief. Olivia. Patricia shrieked, scrambling to her feet and lunging toward the police perimeter. Oh, thank God you are here. Tell these officers to let your father and Jamal go right now. Tell them this is our house and they are making a massive mistake. A female officer immediately stepped into Patricia's path, pressing a firm hand against my mother's chest. Stay exactly where you are. Ma'am, the officer commanded sharply. I ignored my mother completely. Instead, I walked straight up to the lead tactical officer, who was currently watching my approach with deep curiosity. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a meticulously organized manila folder. Officer, my name is Olivia, I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single member of my family could hear me. Until 9 o'clock this morning, I was the sole managing member and registered agent of Oak Haven Holdings, LLC, the corporate entity that previously owned this residential asset. I am the individual who executed the expedited sale to Apex Commercial Development Group. Richard twisted his neck aggressively from his humiliating position on the grass. You sold the house, Richard bellowed, struggling pointlessly against the heavy steel cuffs binding his wrists. You sold my house while we were trapped on an airplane. You vindictive, ungrateful brat. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the police officer, completely ignoring Richard's pathetic outburst. I handed the heavy folder directly to the officer. Inside this file, you will find the fully executed and electronically recorded deed transfer proving Apex Commercial Development Group took absolute legal possession of this property today. I explained smoothly. You will also find a sworn affidavit from their lead property management director explicitly authorizing local law enforcement to arrest and prosecute any unauthorized individuals found trespassing on the premises. I can legally verify that the 4 individuals you have detained are not leaseholders. They do not possess any equity in this property, and they were officially evicted when the corporate transition occurred today. The officer clicked on his tactical flashlight, scanning the dense legal documents with practiced efficiency. He nodded slowly, clearly impressed by the airtight legal fortification I had hand-delivered to his crime scene. This documentation is perfectly in order, the officer confirmed, handing the folder back to me. Apex Development already flagged this address in our dispatch system. This is a straightforward felony trespassing case. Olivia, how could you do this to us? Madison wailed from the edge of the driveway. All my baby things were in that house, my clothes, my furniture, my entire life. Where are we supposed to sleep tonight? I finally turned my head to look at my younger sister. My expression was carved from solid ice. You should probably ask your husband where you are going to sleep tonight. Madison, I replied coldly. Jamal is the financial visionary of your marriage, is he not? He is the one making those high-risk offshore investments. I am sure a man with his unique talents can figure out how to book a motel room for his pregnant wife. Jamal pressed his cheek harder into the damp grass, refusing to look at me. He looked exactly like the pathetic parasitic fraud I had always known him to be. This is sick, Patricia sobbed, sinking back down onto her knees. We are your flesh and blood. You are sending your own father to jail over a petty disagreement about a vacation. We raised you. We gave you everything. Gave you. You gave me nothing. I countered, my voice slicing through the humid night air like a razor blade. You used my corporate property to run an illegal short-term rental business. You used my emergency credit card to fund Jamal's illegal sports betting addiction. You broke into my secure garage, stole my authentic vintage furniture, and fenced my luxury handbags to fund your fake, glamorous lifestyle. Richard stopped struggling against the handcuffs. The profound realization that I knew absolutely everything about their criminal operations finally paralyzed him. You thought I was just a blind, desperate daughter who would keep paying the bills just to earn a tiny scrap of your conditional affection. I continued. You severely underestimated me. I build security infrastructures designed to catch sophisticated international syndicates. Catching 4 arrogant, sloppy suburban thieves was the easiest audit I have ever conducted in my entire professional career. The lead officer stepped forward, grabbing Richard by the shoulder and hoisting him roughly to his feet. Jamal was pulled up next, his expensive tailored suit now covered in mud and grass stains. They looked utterly defeated, physically restrained, and completely stripped of their false superiority. I turned back to the lead officer, reaching into my briefcase one more time. I pulled out a second, significantly thicker folder. This one was sealed with bright red, tamper-evident tape. Officer, I said, handing the heavy package over. The trespassing charge is just the very beginning of their legal problems tonight. I have a comprehensive forensic financial report I need to formally submit into evidence. The officer took the sealed folder from my hands. It was packed with spreadsheets, bank statements, and digital logs. This was a perfectly organized dossier of financial crimes, ready for prosecution. I watched the lead officer break the tamper-evident tape. He shined his flashlight onto the executive summary. What exactly are we looking at here? The officer asked. He sounded intrigued, realizing this was escalating into a major white-collar investigation. You are looking at felony credit card fraud, grand theft, and wire fraud, I stated loudly. The primary suspect is Jamal, currently handcuffed on the grass. The secondary suspects are my parents, who facilitated the theft using a corporate credit card. Patricia let out a strangled gasp. Olivia, you cannot be serious. We are your family. You are talking about federal prison over a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding when you purchase a $12,000 Rolex watch using a card authorized strictly for medical emergencies. I shot back. The officer shined his flashlight onto Jamal's left arm, illuminating the gleaming timepiece. The receipt is on page 4. It includes the serial number, the time of purchase, and the signature of the authorized user. Beside that receipt is documentation for $5,000 in unauthorized flight upgrades. They looted my accounts on their way to a vacation I paid for. The officer flipped to page 4, verifying the matching numbers. Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his face into the wet grass. He knew he was trapped. But that is just the petty cash, I continued. Over the last 12 months, my mother allowed Jamal to use my account to funnel $35,000 into illegal offshore sports betting platforms. Madison stumbled backward in absolute horror. What is she talking about? Jamal. Madison screamed, her voice cracking. You told me you were day trading. You lost $35,000 gambling. Jamal let out a pathetic groan against the dirt. He had played the role of a wealthy entrepreneur for 2 years, deceiving his wife while bleeding my accounts dry. Now the shiny veneer was completely stripped away. Looking at Richard, they might not have known the exact destination of the funds, but they saw the massive charges. Instead of reporting the breach, they covered it up. They protected their precious son-in-law because they were too proud to admit Madison married a degenerate. That is a lie, Richard roared. We thought he was investing. We thought he was going to pay it all back. We never meant to steal anything. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense, I replied, especially not when compounded by running an illegal hospitality business. Officer, if you turn to page 45, you will find records of an unauthorized short-term rental operation while living rent-free. My parents listed the house on vacation rental websites. They pocketed thousands of dollars in untaxed income, exposing my company to massive legal risks. The folder includes the host profile reviews and bank routing numbers where they deposited the illicit funds. The lead officer shook his head in sheer disbelief as he flipped through the printed screenshots. "This is incredibly thorough work," he muttered. "I build digital security architectures for a living," I reminded him. "And the final piece of evidence involves grand theft of personal property. Starting on page 60, you will find camera footage proving Madison and Jamal broke into my locked storage bay. They stole a vintage credenza and 3 authentic designer handbags. I have provided the original purchase receipts and certificates of authenticity. The total value exceeds $25,000. Madison dropped to her knees on the driveway, weeping hysterically. The luxurious life she thought she deserved was completely disintegrating right in front of her eyes. She was an accomplice to grand larceny, married to a gambling addict, facing years in prison. Patricia tried to crawl toward me across the concrete. "Olivia, I am begging you. Please take the folder back. We will give you the watch. We will pay back the money. Do not let them take us away. You cannot send your mother to jail. You sent yourself to jail the second you decided my money was yours to steal," I said without an ounce of pity. "You pushed me out of this family because I was not compliant enough. You traded me for a cheap illusion of status. Now you get to pay the absolute maximum price." I turned my attention back to the officer. "The folder is yours. I am pressing full charges for credit card fraud, wire fraud, grand theft, and trespassing. I expect your Financial Crimes Division will review the backup files tomorrow morning." The officer closed the thick folder and tucked it under his arm. "We will transport it directly to the evidence locker tonight," he confirmed. "We have more than enough probable cause right here to effectuate the arrests for the theft and trespassing tonight." He turned to the other officers standing guard. "Read them their rights again and get them into the back of the transport vehicles. We are booking all of them." The finality of his command echoed loudly. The drop was officially complete. I had handed over the absolute destruction of their lives in a neat package. There was no going back, no room for negotiation, and no possibility of reconciliation. I watched the officers pull Richard and Jamal to their feet, marching them toward the flashing lights. I watched Patricia screaming my name as she was hauled away in steel handcuffs. I watched the trap snap completely shut, securing my absolute victory. The heavy metal doors of the police cruisers slammed shut, sequentially sealing their fate. The bright red and blue strobe lights painted the suburban street in a chaotic glow. My work here was finally done. I turned around and walked calmly back to my black SUV, the heavy thud of the police cruiser doors echoing behind me like the final gavel strike of a judge. I did not look over my shoulder. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the pristine suburban street, casting long, erratic shadows across the manicured lawns of my former neighbors. They were all standing on their porches now, holding their smartphones up to capture every single humiliating second of my family's spectacular downfall. Tomorrow morning, this entire spectacle would be uploaded to local community groups, neighborhood watch forums, and gossip pages. The destruction of their carefully curated social image was happening in real time, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. Inside the nearest police cruiser, Patricia was pressed against the reinforced plexiglass partition. Her tear-streaked face was illuminated by the harsh street lamps. She was screaming something, her mouth moving frantically. But the thick, soundproof barriers of the police vehicle rendered her completely silent to the outside world. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life using her voice to belittle, manipulate, and control every room she walked into. The sudden loss of her voice was the ultimate poetic justice. She was finally trapped in a box where no one cared about her demands. The reality of grand theft and credit card fraud charges was crashing down on her all at once. She was not going to a luxury resort. She was going to a county holding cell where her designer clothes would be stripped away and replaced by a stiff, scratchy uniform. The socialite matriarch was now just another booking number in the criminal justice system. In the second cruiser parked right behind hers, Jamal was experiencing his own catastrophic awakening. The lead officer had explicitly mentioned wire fraud when placing him under arrest. Wire fraud elevates a standard financial crime into a federal offense, especially when the stolen funds are transmitted across international borders to offshore sports betting syndicates. Jamal had spent the last 2 years playing the role of a brilliant, untouchable tech investor. He had worn custom-tailored suits, driven a leased luxury vehicle, and constantly bragged about his high-risk portfolio. Now his hands were locked tightly behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. The $12,000 Rolex, the very watch he had essentially stolen from my bank account, had been confiscated and logged into an evidence bag by the arresting officers. He was facing decades in federal prison. The smooth-talking hustler was entirely out of tricks, and his offshore gambling debt was no longer a secret he could hide behind a charming smile. While Patricia and Jamal were secured in the back of the police vehicles, the officers turned their attention to the 2 family members remaining on the damp grass. Richard had been placed in the third cruiser, his head bowed in absolute defeat, completely stripped of his arrogant patriarchal authority. That left Madison standing alone on the edge of the driveway, because she was pregnant. The officers had decided not to place her in physical restraints, but they informed her she was officially detained, pending further investigation into the stolen property. Madison looked around the chaotic scene, her eyes wide with absolute terror. The golden child, the sister who had been shielded from every consequence, pampered with stolen money and told she was infinitely superior to me, was finally facing the real world. She clutched her smartphone in her trembling hands, her knuckles completely white. Her phone was her entire livelihood. It was the tool she used to broadcast her fake influencer lifestyle to thousands of followers. She had spent the last week posting heavily edited photos of her luxurious Mediterranean baby moon, bragging about the exclusive suites and the first-class flight upgrades. Now she was standing in front of a house she no longer had access to, watching her husband being transported to jail for grand larceny. The flawless aesthetic she had spent years building was completely shattered. There were no filters for this reality. There was no clever caption that could explain away the police cars, the eviction, and the absolute financial ruin. The brands she desperately wanted to sponsor her would flee the moment the public arrest records were published. Her entire digital empire was built on a foundation of stolen money, and the servers had just crashed permanently. "I need my things," Madison shrieked suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise of the police radios. She dropped to her knees on the hard concrete driveway, no longer caring about her expensive maternity dress. "Please, you do not understand. My entire life is in those bags. My makeup, my ring, light, my content schedule. I have sponsored posts due tomorrow. I need my equipment. I have to update my followers. I cannot just disappear. My brand will die." A female officer stepped forward, her expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," the officer instructed firmly. "Your personal belongings have been secured by the property management company. You will be provided with information on how to retrieve them tomorrow. Right now. You need to focus on finding a place to sleep tonight, because you cannot stay on this property." Madison let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She fell forward, pressing her forehead against the cold pavement. The absolute absurdity of her priorities was staggering. Her mother was going to jail. Her father was going to jail. Her husband was facing federal wire fraud charges. And all Madison could think about was missing her sponsored posts and losing her social media engagement metrics. She was entirely hollow inside a shallow digital avatar, completely incapable of processing real-world consequences. The lead officer walked over to my SUV and tapped gently on my driver's side window. I rolled the glass down smoothly. "We have everything we need for tonight," the officer said, his tone respectful and highly professional. "We will be transporting the suspects to the county processing facility now. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit will contact your corporate legal team in the morning to review the digital evidence folder you provided. You are free to leave the scene." I nodded, acknowledging the officer with a polite smile. "Thank you for your swift response tonight. I appreciate your department handling this corporate security breach with such efficiency." The officer tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser. I rolled the window up, sealing myself inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin of my vehicle, through the tinted glass. I watched the police convoy slowly pull away from the curb. The flashing lights painted the neighborhood in brief flashes of red and blue as they drove down the street, carrying my toxic family away to their new reality. I shifted my car into drive and pressed my foot lightly on the gas pedal. I drove in the opposite direction, leaving the dark, empty house and the shattered remnants of their lives entirely in my rearview mirror. The morning sun rose over Miami, casting a brilliant golden light across the city. But for my family, the day brought only the harsh, unforgiving glare of public exposure. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee, the digital fallout had already reached catastrophic levels. The neighborhood watch groups had done exactly what bored, wealthy suburbanites do best. They had uploaded high-defin videos of the midnight police raid to every local community forum. Within hours, the footage of Richard pinned to the damp grass and Patricia screaming in handcuffs had jumped from private messaging boards to mainstream social media platforms. Madison had spent years tagging her location, flaunting the Oak Haven property as her own personal estate, and building an audience of hundreds of thousands of followers who tuned in daily to envy her flawless, affluent lifestyle. That massive audience now had front-row seats to her absolute ruin. I sat at my kitchen island and watched the analytics of her digital destruction unfold in real time. Madison's management agency, a boutique firm that represented luxury lifestyle creators, sent out a public relations statement before 9 a.m. They formally severed all ties with her, citing a strict morality clause in their representation contract. Her inbox, which I could no longer see but could easily imagine, was undoubtedly flooded with automated cancellation notices from clothing brands, baby boutiques, and cosmetic lines. Sponsors do not want their expensive products associated with a family currently sitting in county jail for felony grand theft and wire fraud. Madison's follower count plummeted by the tens of thousands every single hour. The comment sections on her previously pristine photographs were hijacked by internet sleuths posting links to the public arrest records. The golden child was entirely stripped of her gold, left with nothing but a worthless, dying digital footprint. But the social media execution was only a fraction of the devastation. The most brutal blow came from Atlanta. Beatrice Jamal's mother had managed to secure a flight back to Georgia the previous day, abandoning the chaos at the Italian cruise terminal to protect her own sanity. She was a woman whose entire identity revolved around her position in high society, her country club memberships, and her pristine reputation among the elite circles of Atlanta. She had proudly told all her wealthy friends that her son was a brilliant venture capitalist, married into a highly successful Florida real estate family. When Beatrice woke up and opened the comprehensive email I had sent her detailing the $35,000 in stolen gambling funds and the fraudulent purchase of the $12,000 Rolex, her reaction was swift and merciless. Beatrice did not possess a single ounce of maternal unconditional love. She operated purely on the currency of social status, and Jamal had just bankrupted her reputation. Through my ongoing digital monitoring of the public legal filings, I saw exactly how Beatrice retaliated. Jamal had used his one phone call from the county holding cell to dial his mother, likely begging for her to wire the funds necessary to secure a bail bondsman. He needed thousands of dollars in liquid cash to get himself, Patricia, and Richard out of the concrete cells. Beatrice refused the charges. She declined the call from the county jail, blocked his phone number from her carrier plan, and immediately contacted her own estate lawyers. She drafted a legally binding cease and desist order and had it delivered directly to the jailhouse, formally banning Jamal from ever stepping foot on her Atlanta property. She cut him out of her will, froze the small trust account she had previously maintained for his future children, and sent a mass email to their extended family, distancing herself entirely from his criminal actions. She essentially threw her own son to the wolves to ensure the stench of his federal wire fraud charges did not cling to her designer clothes. Jamal was completely marooned. His wealthy mother had slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolts just as firmly as the property management company had locked the doors of the Oak Haven house. This left Madison completely isolated in a cheap, unsavory roadside motel near the police precinct. Because she was pregnant and not directly charged with the financial crimes at the scene, the officers had released her with a mandatory notice to appear for questioning regarding the stolen vintage furniture. She had been forced to use the absolute last of her loose physical cash to rent a tiny stained motel room that smelled heavily of stale smoke and bleach. She had no access to her designer maternity clothes. The property management company had legally secured her belongings in the unventilated storage unit, and she did not possess the key or the authorization to access it. She had no vehicle, as Jamal's leased luxury car had been impounded by the police since it was parked illegally on the street during the arrest. She had no credit cards, no bank accounts, and no income. I watched the location data ping from her cellular device tracking her stagnant position at the budget motel. She was sitting on a cheap, sagging mattress, staring at peeling wallpaper, wearing the exact same wrinkled clothes she had worn on the grueling economy flight from Frankfurt. The reality of her situation was absolute and crushing. The husband she married for his supposed entrepreneurial wealth was sitting in a cinderblock cell facing federal prosecution. The parents who had shielded her from every consequence and funded her entire existence were locked in separate holding facilities, facing their own grand larceny charges. Madison had spent her entire life acting as if she were inherently superior to me, simply because she knew how to smile for a camera and manipulate our parents' favoritism. She believed that manipulating people was a valid substitute for hard work. Now the cameras were off. The audience was gone. The enablers were incarcerated. She picked up her phone and attempted to call me. My screen lit up with her caller ID, silently flashing her name across the sleek interface of my blocked call registry. The automated system intercepted the call, instantly, sending her directly to a disconnected tone. She was screaming into a void, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of her own entitlement, completely and utterly alone. It took exactly 4 days for the harsh reality of the criminal justice system to chew them up and spit them out into an unrecognizable world. Richard managed to secure a predatory bail bond for himself and Patricia by liquidating a secret meager retirement account he had hidden from my mother for years. The bail for federal wire fraud, however, was astronomically high. Because Beatrice had legally severed all ties and blocked her son, Jamal remained locked securely inside a federal holding facility. Madison, Patricia, and Richard were forced to pull the last remaining scraps of Richard's depleted funds to secure a cramped, moldy 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying industrial neighborhood located 40 miles away from the pristine suburban bubble they used to rule. The contrast was absolutely staggering. The family that previously demanded a $40,000 Mediterranean cruise suite was now sharing a single stained bathroom with flickering fluorescent lights. The walls of the cheap rental were paper thin, offering zero protection from the sounds of blaring sirens and heavy traffic outside. Madison spent her days sitting on a sagging secondhand mattress, crying over her suspended social media accounts and the looming reality of single motherhood without a wealthy benefactor. Patricia, stripped of her designer clothes and country club prestige, paced the cramped linoleum kitchen floor in cheap sweatpants, muttering frantically about how quickly their society friends had abandoned them. Richard sat at a scratched laminate dining table, staring blankly at the towering stack of legal documents and court summons that practically guaranteed his total financial ruin. Desperation breeds a very specific kind of audacity. Once they realized their social network had completely collapsed and no wealthy friends were coming to their rescue, they turned their sights back onto their favorite target. They assumed my boundary of steel was simply a temporary punishment. They believed that underneath my cold corporate exterior, I was still the desperate daughter craving their validation. They decided to launch a relentless coordinated campaign to beg for my mercy. Since I had blocked their primary phone numbers and email addresses, they resorted to guerrilla tactics. Richard purchased cheap prepaid burner phones from a local convenience store. My corporate email inbox began flagging dozens of messages sent from newly created anonymous accounts. The subject lines ranged from aggressive demands to pathetic pleas. One email from Patricia read, "We are eating canned soup for dinner. Your pregnant sister is sleeping on a terrible mattress. Please drop the charges. We will do anything you want." A text message from Richard's burner phone arrived hours later. "I am your father. You are destroying our legacy over money. Call me immediately so we can fix this mess privately." Madison took the most dramatic route. She managed to figure out the exact address of my cybersecurity consulting firm's downtown headquarters. She attempted to bypass the building's lobby security by claiming she had a medical family emergency. She stood in the polished marble foyer, sobbing hysterically and demanding the receptionist lead her up to my executive suite. My building security team, whom I pay exceptionally well, handled the breach with absolute professionalism. They escorted her out onto the hot pavement and warned her that police would be called if she ever returned. I sat in my high-rise office monitoring the security reports and reading the desperate emails. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering guilt, no hesitation, and no desire to engage. They were not apologizing for the credit card fraud, the theft of my vintage furniture, or the illegal rental business. They were simply apologizing because they got caught and were currently suffering the severe consequences. They wanted their comfortable lives back, and they expected me to write the massive check. I picked up my phone and called David, my corporate attorney. "David," I said, my voice crisp and commanding. "The eviction and the criminal charges were highly effective, but the suspects are currently attempting to initiate unauthorized contact. They are using burner phones to bypass my digital blocks, and my sister attempted to breach my corporate headquarters this morning. I want this harassment terminated immediately. Consider it done." David replied, the predatory confidence evident in his tone. "We have more than enough documented evidence of harassment, theft, and unauthorized trespassing to secure a permanent barrier. I will draft the formal cease and desist orders right now. I will also fast-track comprehensive restraining orders for you, your personal residence, and your commercial properties. They will not be allowed within 500 feet of you." Less than 24 hours later, a professional process server pulled up to the decaying apartment complex where my family was currently hiding. I received the live update directly from the server's tracking application. The server walked up the concrete stairs, navigating past chipped paint and flickering hallway lights. He knocked loudly on the flimsy wooden door of apartment 4B. Richard opened the door, looking exhausted and deeply paranoid. The process server did not waste a single breath on pleasantries. He thrust a thick stack of manila envelopes directly into Richard's chest. "You have been officially served," the process server announced loudly, ensuring his body camera captured the legal delivery. Richard stumbled backward into the cramped living room, clutching the heavy legal documents. Patricia and Madison rushed out from the tiny kitchen, their eyes wide with panic. Richard tore open the first envelope. The bold legal header confirmed their absolute worst nightmare. It was a formal court-mandated restraining order signed by a county judge protecting my physical person, my downtown penthouse, and my corporate headquarters. The accompanying cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of aggressive legal intimidation. David had outlined exactly what would happen if they sent one more email, dialed one more burner phone, or approached my properties. The letter explicitly stated that any violation of the restraining order would result in immediate arrest and would be subsequently used by the district attorney to seek maximum prison sentences for their pending grand theft and wire fraud charges. Patricia collapsed onto the cheap, sagging sofa, the reality of the paperwork completely crushing the last remaining ounce of her delusion. The legal documents proved that I was not playing a game. There would be no tearful family reunion. There would be no financial bailout. The bridge between us was not just burned. It had been legally and permanently eradicated. They were completely cut off, trapped in a tiny, sweltering apartment with their mounting legal bills, utterly terrified to even type my name into a search engine. The protective barrier around my life was now impenetrable. 6 months later, the warm, salty breeze of the ANC swept across my private cliffside terrace. I sat comfortably in a plush linen lounge chair, a chilled glass of AO wine resting in my hand. The breathtaking caldera of Santorini stretched out endlessly before me, a magnificent canvas of deep sapphire water, contrasting sharply against the iconic whitewashed architecture of the Greek islands. The Mediterranean sun beat down perfectly, warming my skin and melting away whatever microscopic traces of stress still lingered in my muscles. I had initially booked a luxury cruise for a family that despised me. Now I was enjoying an exclusive month-long villa residency entirely for myself, funded by the exact same wealth they had tried so desperately to steal. The silence surrounding me was absolutely golden. There were no buzzing burner phones. There were no frantic, guilt-tripping emails invading my secure servers. There were no unannounced visits from entitled relatives demanding I fund their superficial lifestyles. The restraining orders had worked flawlessly, functioning as the ultimate real-world firewall. When you enforce a boundary with the uncompromising weight of the legal system, toxic people suddenly learn how to respect it. My corporate attorney, David, handled the occasional legal updates, so I never had to hear their names directly. The federal prosecutors were moving forward aggressively with the wire fraud charges against Jamal, without a high-priced defense attorney to save him. His future was locked behind cold steel bars. Richard and Patricia were currently drowning in public defender paperwork, desperately trying to negotiate plea deals for their roles in the credit card fraud and the illegal property rental scheme. They were still trapped in that miserable, cramped apartment, living entirely on the meager scraps of my father's decimated savings. Madison, the former golden child who once commanded hundreds of thousands of social media followers, had vanished completely from the digital landscape. Without my money to buy her designer clothes, without my property to use as a glamorous backdrop, and without her fraudulent husband to project the image of a power couple. Her influencer empire had collapsed into digital dust. She was forced to face the reality of single motherhood in the real world, relying on parents who were facing felony indictments. The kingdom of lies they had built together was fully reduced to rubble, and I did not lose a single second of sleep over their self-inflicted destruction. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the crisp, dry flavor, looking out over the endless blue horizon. I allowed myself to reflect on the true nature of family. Society conditions us from birth to believe that blood relations are sacred and unbreakable. We are constantly told that we must forgive every transgression, tolerate every disrespect, and absorb every abuse simply because we share a genetic code with our abusers. My parents used that exact societal conditioning as a weapon. They weaponized the concept of family to extract my resources, demanding absolute loyalty, while offering me nothing but contempt in return. But I had learned the hard way that family is not a biological obligation. Family is an action. It is a continuous mutual exchange of respect, support, and genuine care. Blood might make you related, but loyalty, honesty, and boundaries make you family. When people who share your last name treat you worse than complete strangers, you have zero obligation to keep them in your life. Walking away from them was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound self-preservation. I did not destroy my family. I simply stopped paying the subscription fee for my own abuse. I used to believe that my success intimidated them. I used to think that if I just bought them a nicer house, funded a more expensive vacation, or gave them a higher credit limit, they would finally look at me with the pride and affection they showered so easily upon Madison. I was the invisible architect of their comfort, desperately hoping they would one day acknowledge the foundation I had built for them. But wealth does not change toxic people. It only amplifies their entitlement and exposes their greed. They did not resent me because I was a computer nerd. And they did not resent me because I worked long hours. They resented me because my independence was a constant glaring reminder of their own parasitic failures. They hated that they needed my money to survive, so they tried to punish me for providing it. My company has experienced its most profitable quarter to date since I eliminated the relentless distraction of my family. My team recently secured 3 new international contracts, and I am currently negotiating a major expansion into the European market. When you stop pouring your energy into a bottomless pit of familial guilt, you suddenly have an abundance of power to invest in your own growth. The mental clarity that comes from purging toxic elements from your life is absolutely unparalleled. My personal network is fully optimized, running without a single bug glitch or security vulnerability. Now I am completely free. I run a thriving cybersecurity firm that protects the assets of massive corporations. I own a beautiful downtown penthouse that is completely secure from unauthorized entry. I am 33 years old, financially independent, and deeply at peace with the woman I see in the mirror every single morning. I no longer shrink myself to make other people feel larger. I no longer apologize for demanding basic human respect. The firewall I built around my heart and my finances is permanently active, and the authorized user list is currently a party of 1. The sun began to dip lower toward the sparkling ANC, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of magenta gold and deep violet. It was a flawless, quiet, and utterly perfect evening. I set my wine glass down on the smooth stone table and opened my laptop. I had a few lucrative security contracts to review before heading out to a private seafood dinner on the coast. I was building an empire, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it entirely on my own terms. They always told me I would be absolutely nothing without the support of my family. They said I would be miserable, lonely, and completely isolated if I dared to walk away from them. It turns out I gained the entire world the second I finally cut them out of it. Have you ever had to use the absolute full extent of the law to teach your toxic family a permanent lesson about respect and boundaries? How did you finally break free from the people who mistreated you while demanding your loyalty? Tell me your story down in the comments below. If my journey to absolute freedom resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about setting firm boundaries, protecting your peace, and reclaiming your power. Remember, you do not owe your success, your sanity, or your peace of mind to anyone who treats you like an option. Protect your assets, secure your boundaries, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. As an AI analyzing Olivia's intense journey, the most profound lesson that emerges from her story is a fundamental truth about human relationships. Biology does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your sanity. Society often conditions us to believe that family bonds are sacred and unbreakable, demanding endless forgiveness regardless of how deeply we are betrayed. Olivia's narrative shatters that illusion. It teaches us that when familial ties become synonymous with exploitation, establishing a boundary of steel is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. She realized that her relatives were not just taking her money. They were actively feeding off her self-esteem to inflate their own fragile egos. The real tragedy of toxic dynamics is how they trick you into believing your worth is tied to how much disrespect you can quietly endure. For years, Olivia functioned as the invisible architect of her family's comfort, hoping her generosity would eventually earn their genuine love. But you cannot buy respect from people who are fundamentally committed to undervaluing you. The defining moment of growth is not when you finally get them to apologize. It is when you realize you no longer need their apology to thrive. By cutting the financial and emotional cords, Olivia demonstrated that true freedom requires radical courage. We must be willing to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. You hold the administrative rights to your own life, and you possess the absolute authority to revoke access from anyone who introduces toxicity into your environment. If you are currently exhausting yourself for people who only view you as a convenience, take a step back today and evaluate who truly deserves a place in your life.